Welcome once more to the Outcast Intellectual Podcast, which today the MVP, Chrislyn McGettigan, returns and is probably as confused about the topic as most other people would be. Because I forget exactly what inspired me to think of this topic originally, but
I remember that actually.
well,
It
what
had to
was it?
it had to do with the changes happening to Copy Accelerator.
All right.
And yeah,
Okay, now I had actually that wasn't a plant. That wasn't me saying like, oh, I forgot, just so that you can say,
sorry.
just so everybody else knows, because the Copy Accelerator, for people who wouldn't be familiar with it, is this group that we're both in, and this isn't an episode that's going to be about that specifically, but it's mostly, at least from my perspective, like about the nature of kind of having a given perception of something and then seeing kind of like how true is it really? Like is it even accurate? Because there are a lot of things I think that people, they like to romanticize, and it's almost as if they feel like subconsciously they need to romanticize it in order to kind of suppress the truth of it in a certain way. And it's even sometimes people just romanticize it because they do kind of idolize it. But for example, like whenever you hear people talk about pregnancy, for example, usually when you hear, and I know this is not 100%, but usually when you hear women talk about it, there's almost like this magical connotation to it, creating a life, giving birth. Like there's definitely a different notion to that compared to I think like statistically, I think guys probably generally like look at it more like that mechanical sense of having a kid and things like that. I know that it's not even, but even just the notion of like people choosing to look at something because of how their relationship with that thing impacts it. So I think that like if you think of like what it takes for a woman to be willing to go through with pregnancy is much different from what it takes for a guy to, because it's like, sure, the guy will suffer during that process as well, but only in the sense only in proportion to the woman suffering during that period. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas like you're the one who has to think, this is a good idea. You know what I mean? Like
Like
and
to
so
stretch my body out and then stretch it out some more.
for all those months too, not even
Yeah.
just like that, the one time. So that's something that's really interesting to me, because I think I've mentioned that in a previous episode before, but my biggest takeaway from my sociology class in college was when somebody perceives a situation as real, it's real in its consequences. And so much of human civilization is like that. Same with what I've mentioned with popular psychology, where a lot of it comes from like philosophical kind of assumptions that are then manifested in the, like, I want to say, I mean, it is an industry, but in the field as well, as opposed to a purely objective perspective, because human beings are looking at other human beings, and so they need to project their own beliefs onto it. Otherwise, they can't, look at it. So the overarching element of it is, like the title said, are we even friends? Because how much of what we consider friendship is truly a bond that is created by individuals often, and how much of it is just your body telling you that you need to be altruistic towards things. Same thing with like family members. If you think about it, there's no real reason why like a direct genetic family member would have to support the existence of another one.
Right, or that there would be any like I see what you're saying, and like my brain, the way that it's going, I'm not really articulating this well, is that like there's no real difference between a blood relative and a friend as far as like physiologically how your body's identifying this other human, right?
Right.
You know that's your mom or your dad or your brother or whatever because you had experiences with them growing up to know that. But if you were estranged from your blood relatives and like ended up like adoption, for example, and ended
Mhm.
up being in the same room as your birth mother and even talking to her and you didn't know it, your body wouldn't pick up on that and be like, ah, this is fundamentally different from every other person in here because I'm related to them. Like,
Right.
so I see what you're saying on that level. It's about belief systems and experiences instead of like something that's innate, or something that's physiological, or like there being something different on a structural level
Mhm.
between like a family member and a friend. And this is very interesting too, because now this huge aspect of society gets put into this, because how many times have you heard like, well, blood's thicker than water, or well,
Right.
that's your family, you don't have to like them but you love them. And I love Gen Z. I love Gen Z. I mean, I love to hate them sometimes, but one of the things I love about Gen Z is they're taking a lot of these like things we take as given, like this, for example, and they're going, I don't fucking care. I don't
Right.
care. I think we've been seeing like a little bit of a trend of this for a little bit longer. But people are cutting off ties with toxic family members that they're like, yeah, I don't need to be in contact with you because you don't enrich my life. You make it much harder. And I don't get anything out of this relationship. Or you're manipulative or you've been abusive. And just because we share blood does not mean I need to value this relationship. It like, that's not the only reason, right? Like you still need to give me other reasons to value our friendship.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's interesting how on the one hand it becomes less mechanical, but it also becomes more mechanical in a way because now it's like to what degree like it's interesting in the sense of okay, we no longer have a preconceived kind of notion of our relationship must be like this in that sense. But at the same time, there's also kind of the breakdown element of it where it's like, okay, but if for example, if Patrick comes home late one night or comes home late 3 nights in a month, that doesn't mean you divorce him. You know what I
Right.
mean? But
Right.
there are literally people out there who are more in that line of kind of the notion of the self-care, self-love thing where it's like they would use that as an excuse to like, oh well, if I'm upset that this person is like doing this thing that like yeah, like it's not cool, but it's by no means like a fundamental foundational issue. But if the person doesn't have the emotional maturity to like really like want to make it work or whatever, they're just like, oh well, it's all about just kind of enabling what they want. Then they can use that as an excuse for, well, I need to love myself enough to, not tolerate this. It's okay, or you can just have a conversation with the person, right?
Well, so I think we're touching on a couple of different things here, if I might,
Definitely,
if I may,
go, go ahead.
because we, you are right that we categorize these different relationships we have with individuals. We have our family, we have our friends, and then we have romantic partners, um, or significant others, however you want to conceptualize that. Somebody that
Right.
you're letting into your life in a capacity that is much different than your family and friends. Um, that I feel like complicates things in a different way, because
Mm,
what yours, I think there's a lot of like, especially when we're talking about boyfriend, girlfriend, where it's like, well, I don't want to put up with this shit anymore. I'm out, I don't want this person to be the person I'm with. This is stupid.
right.
Um, which like for family or friends, you might not have that sort of flippancy of like what you're going to put up with. Or it just might look a lot different. So I do think what you were just talking about to me comes down to respecting other people and what you are willing to, as a person, deal with as far as boundaries are concerned and respect is concerned and what that looks like for you. And then how you're able to communicate when you're feeling disrespected with someone else, right? Because so if Patrick came home late 3 nights this week and I was like, fuck you, a normal human person with a logical brain would be like, this is interesting. What, just from a place of curiosity and not judgment and anger, how come you were out late? Like what was going on? This is not typical. So
Right.
did something not typical happen? I'm intrigued. And he would say, yeah, I wanted to get fucking sloshed with my guy friends, which my husband wouldn't say, but like if that was the case and I didn't feel like calling you and it didn't matter because it's my life and fuck you. Now we're talking about like a very specific scenario, right?
Right.
If he was like, because my husband's a bartender, there were these 3 guys, this happens all the time. There were these 3 guys and they were just yucking it up with each other. And I last called them, but they drank those their last beer for like 2 hours. Right. And I was there for fucking ever and I couldn't close the doors. Oh, well, this makes perfect sense. None of what you were doing that kept you out is a disrespectful thing to me. I should not, as a logical human being, get angry about this fact. I can be irritated that happened because things in life happen that we don't enjoy all the time. But it's not speaking to our relationship that something in life occurred that was irritating. The other scenario does speak to our relationship because it's like, a lot of times you'll see people get defensive in these kind of things. Like, why do you care?
Most of the time, yeah.
Yes. So that I love when people have any kind of rise in emotion because it's like, okay, the truth is if you're having that reaction, you care a fuck ton about whatever it is we're discussing. There's either some guilt there or there's some panic or there is an underlying reason that your response to that is what, blowing up emotionally or even just going from one type of tone of speaking, like you and I speaking right now, to a different one, right? So like, let's talk about why that happened. But if you're the person that's like, why do you fucking care that I was out? You're not thinking to yourself, it's weird. I just was talking totally normal. And then when they asked me that, I kind of got upset and I got like defensive about it. 99% of people's brains don't do that. I feel like I've gotten off on a tangent here, but
no, I mean, because it does kind of reflect on it in the sense of, with the notion of it, are we friends or is it just like this biological thing? Is somebody like, it goes back to the same thing of the perception where, okay, in this case, like there are definitely people who would think, okay, like if this person came back late 3 nights in a row this week, where they would get jealous and like assume that they're like talking to somebody else because it's the only logical, situation that could possibly be going on, right? But it's like at the same time, it's like, I guess it's kind of that notion of how somebody sees a situation versus those biological, influences. And it's like you said, if somebody was being rational and not being defensive, emotional about it, then they could just think, like, okay, this is a trend. What is causing the trend? And so I'm like, no, pretty much nobody does that, right? And a lot of people.
Yes, that's not usually the automatic response.
Right. Most people do get defensive or they don't talk about it and then they, explode later on. And that's its own whole thing as to why people would do that. But just the notion of like how much of it is as people believe it is versus kind of that biological influence on them that they're not noticing. And so when you have that, it's just interesting to me because again, it comes into like when you read a book, there's the concept of a I think it's called the flawed narrator, where it's like the unreliable narrator, something like that, where they're saying this is what's going on, but with time you come to learn that you can't trust what they're saying, which is what makes it interesting in that sense. But in real life, it makes it so goddamn difficult and more so
Yeah.
frustrating.
Great for like a fiction novel, a bummer in real life. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
we deal with it every day, stranger than fiction, so to speak.
Well, I think that you're bringing up a really good point, though, because a lot perspective has a lot to do with it, and people's realities differ. And that's not in like a woo way. Like that's not like that's not me going like, it's not to excuse things, and it's not to like pretend that the world is fundamentally unique for each person, which it is. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that your perspective on how you're viewing things, the lens at which you're looking through something, is going to significantly change how you see it versus how someone else sees it. And I think this is a lot of times where intimate relationships or romantic relationships, you see all this fighting, because that is that level of relationship. If you have family, friends, intimate relationship, that is the most vulnerable place you can be with someone, right? Because by definition, you've let them be closer to you than anyone else. So if your realities aren't aligning, if the way that you're viewing things isn't aligning, and you're sharing this much of yourself and your life with someone, it's bound to get very, like, I'm thinking the word friction, but like there's going
or whatever.
So it's hard though, because we are egocentric a little bit by design, by being human, and I keep having to remind myself, and I will love to remind our lovely audience, that our brains aren't meant for our social settings and society and the place that we currently live. They're meant to keep you the fuck alive. Period. End. That was like your brain. It's your only goal. And it's honestly meant to keep you alive in a much different environment than this. It's very good at adapting, but it's always
stay cohesive so the mountain lions can't pick you off, not like juggle all the relationships and responsibilities in a modern world filled with skyscrapers and internet.
Yeah, think about that. Like, think about how much your brain has to, like, based on like how we know evolution works and the rate at which evolution works and the rate at which our shit's evolving all the fucking time.
It's kind of your amazing when you think about it, that it's doing it all.
Yes, and now we're tangenting, but like I'm a firm believer that this is what much of the disorders that we see and have talked about at nauseum on this podcast,
it's connected,
are related to. But when it comes to, like, to get back to the point of this podcast, like how much of it is real and how much of it is like a biological response or a survival mechanism, or like, are we even friends, or is this our brains going, what helps us live and survive? Belonging in a group. Right. So we should probably do that, right?
Even just the notion of like, you tend to like people who are like you in a perceived form, right? Who share values or whatever. Well, what is racism? What is sexism? It's the discrimination against something that is different. And so that kind of brings home that element of, okay, how much of all these things that we see as a social issue in quotes is kind of just like a exaggerated biological response to the other in that sense, because it's based on the perception of the other. Like when you think of how the Nazis basically got all of Germany to despise Jews. Well, Jews were Germans, right? And yet Nazis, well, that's the thing.
Logically, yes. But in this parenthetical, no. Right?
And so that's where you have like this biological element of these different things where it's like, and I mean to talk about that specific topic would obviously require talking about all the context that surrounds it, because people love acting like Nazis were the only anti-Semitic groups of people during the 20th
They're just the
century.
most recent.
Right. Well, they're
Yeah.
just the most famous, you
Yeah,
know.
that's a good point. Yeah.
So, but thinking of things in that notion where it's like, you are different from me, and I mean, it happens today too. Like it's honestly, the sex wars stuff, the race wars stuff of the modern day is nothing but a bitchy modern day version of that in a lot of sense. Like if you think about it, like it would be interesting to look at like the trends of past centuries and such, because okay, the most well-known example of the discrimination against the other in quotes of the 20th century, I think, is largely like religious in that sense, where it's like it's the Nazis for, you know, with the Jews. There's also I think the Turkish and the Armenians. I only know of it because of System of a Down, the band, like they were so up in arms about like there was like an Armenian genocide. Point being, nowadays it's, you know, the the women versus the men, or men versus women, black versus white versus black, trans versus this versus like, it's all these big tribes of this is us versus them.
Yeah, you hit it exactly on the nose. It's tribalism. And where do we think that might come from? Oh, gee, does that sound like
Tribes.
an evolutionary necessity? Because if somebody from a different tribe came up to you, you didn't know if you could fucking trust them.
Mhm.
You didn't know what their values were. You didn't know if they were a safe person to be around. So you stuck with people that you did know. And like, I love this topic. I think it's just fascinating. But like, one of the things we know when you look at like social psychology is that there's like a cap of how many people you can have any kind of like relative closeness with in your life, and
Okay.
it's a little bigger than I would have thought. It's around 150 people is like this cap of like people, you know, right? Like,
Okay.
I have over 1,000 Facebook friends. These are people I've connected with at some point through my lifetime, and they went, "Oh my God, let's be Facebook friends." So I went, "Great," but like 85% of them, I couldn't tell you where we met or what they're. I don't know them.
Yeah,
I
they're
don't.
Middle Eastern, Indian, or people from Africa that like you like just randomly got a friend request from that like you just
Right,
never like talked to.
right. Well, I don't have as many of
But-
those because
Well, it's not a, yeah, I
yeah.
know I'm over generalizing, of
Yes,
course,
but
but
the point is like there's about 100, there's like a cap of about 150 people in your life that you can feel any kind of like, you know, connection to or understanding of. And then it kind of, you've met your threshold of being able to like keep all of these people in your brain and know what's going on with them. Which is interesting, right? Because the theory is that that dates back to tribalism and how big our tribes used to be. And a lot of people, there are people I am friends with who believe that we should sort of go back to this as a political standpoint, where it's like, essentially, tribes should rule themselves and have their own rules, and we won't call them tribes, but it'll be communities. And the reason that there's so much animosity in politics is because we're trying to govern a group of people that's too large to understand all of the needs. So like, this is another interesting perspective, is that like modern society is looking at people as a whole, but our brains work as a us versus them all the time.
right.
We're
And
all.
so, and that's kind of the best example of what we're both talking about here, is that we are looking at people from these preconceived notions that is formed by the assumption of, oh, this must be how it is, versus seeing what it is. I think it's from one of the Sherlock Holmes movies, right? And I'm paraphrasing it, but it's where he says that the people end up finding facts to, like, you know, justify their feelings or their beliefs versus making their beliefs align with what the facts are.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Here's a fun thing that I heard the other day that I'm gonna just keep in my back pocket for the rest of my life. Have you ever heard, I don't know who it was, might have been Ben Shapiro, someone similar, that was like, facts don't care about your feelings.
Which is, and I know I'm probably going to alienate somebody, but I do always find it hilarious when somebody who's fundamentally religious says that, when it's, even if you see, you know, faith as a positive thing, it still comes back to faith, not facts, you know, but yeah.
But this is something that we've
Sidebar.
heard, this idea is in existence, that it's like, facts don't care about your feelings don't matter, the facts are what matter. But that's not what we see when we look at like the science behind how people decide what they are going to believe in and when they decide to change their minds. The truth is, when you look at it from that lens, and again, it's all about the lens with which you are looking at things, what we find out is that feelings don't give one flying fuck about facts.
Right. And
if
feelings
you have,
can change things to become facts.
right, well, and you can, there's so many things, there's so many facts in the world right now that we have, that you can just cherry pick the ones that fit your agenda. And this is not today's podcast is not about like
misinformation in the modern age.
What it is about, though, what it's turning into is this idea of us versus them, tribalism, and how we're choosing who we're communicating with and who we're allowing to be ourselves to be close with. So in that regard, when you think of things that way, how hard it is, think of the person that you have the most visceral, yucky feeling about on Facebook because of the shit they post, wherever you land on the spectrum. Maybe you're like hardcore traditional values, and the person that you're thinking of is like all about teaching 5-year-olds about trans rights in public schools. And you're like, God, I don't care who you are, but like you've got, you have that person in your life where you're like, I can't believe they are so fundamentally different from where I am.
And vice versa. Yeah.
And vice versa. But you can't see or agree with that perspective. And the facts aren't going to change that. If I was like, here's all the facts as to why that's actually okay, you'd be like, please go fuck yourself. This is why I believe what I believe. I have these facts, and these facts are the ones that I'm looking at.
Right. Which is kind of funny that like facts of the feelings don't care about the facts of the facts.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me, even in the sense of like how you mentioned like the Gen Z thing, where it's like it's kind of not disintegrating, like taking apart like the different notions of things that we've kind of experienced for a good while, and now it's looking at it like mechanically in that sense, where it's like, okay, like one thing that I do understand is like, yeah, gender roles are ultimately something that is socially constructed. That doesn't mean that's like the elements coming from the sex is socially constructed, because, for example, in Homo sapiens, men are generally more robust, for lack of a better term, than the females, in the sense of, okay, I think it's sexual, not dysmorphia, whatever, because that's like your perception of yourself in that sense. But there's the term for an evolution of like how like one sex will tend to have X characteristics compared to the other one. So like if the females tend to be larger in the species or whatever. Yeah. So like in Homo sapiens, generally the guys are bigger, which like because biologically we are more inclined to be the hunters in that sense.
Well, yeah, like physiologically, men have more testosterone, women have more estrogen. Testosterone is going to make you bigger.
Right. In Homo sapiens.
From a physiological fucking standpoint, point blank. Right. But then
the skeletal, so then there's also the gender roles. So it's like, it's too complex to like fully address the whole thing. And as a sidebar, but the point being where it's that like people had these perceptions, and for the longest time they had just kind of gone along with like, this is how it is, this is how it is. And like as time has gone on, we've kind of gotten, at least each successive generation in that sense has had perspective on what came before, where it's like, well, no, like imagine when or remember when like divorce itself was something that like you just like people would die miserable because they just did not consider it an option because they thought of it as, to till death do us part. Like you just
Right.
cannot break that.
Well, and the
And now you
social stigma attached to it, it
right,
wasn't an option because, not because like physically you couldn't go out and say, or like get in your car and be like, I'm never coming back. I hate you so much. This is miserable.
right.
Because you would be socially ostracized and that belonging comes back into play. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's okay. But like now you have people who get married after they've been dating for 8 months and then they
Yeah.
divorce in 4 months later. And it's like, it's like it doesn't mean anything at all. And so that even reminds me of something else that I'm glad that I remembered it because it occurred to me probably like 5 minutes ago. And you know how like we probably lose as many thoughts as we
Yes.
come up with.
Yeah, for sure.
But I remember reading before that biologically, women are inclined towards being attracted to something that is not similar to them. And then like you could say it's like, okay, well, opposites attract, but I mean like in the sense of something that displays from the perception genetic diversity.
Oh, that's really
Something with,
interesting.
but when they feel like things are dangerous, that is when they tend to be attracted to things that are more similar.
Yes,
Now that
that
may
makes sense.
apply to men as well. I don't know. Like I got that information from a passage in a book, so maybe that person was only focusing on the female expression of that. But it's interesting to even think of that because again, if it is true, I don't have a way of knowing if it's the case or not. But if it is, then it shows that even why you, in quotes, are inclined towards being attracted to something could be genetically not
Yeah.
pre-decided, but pre-influenced or
And that's fascinating. That is something that's like, I would love to learn more information about this actually, because I don't have a lot of
mm,
knowledge in this area, but I am really curious about it because first of all, I know a little bit about generational traumas and like generational, how we pass down our experiences, even though our children haven't lived them,
okay.
like to our kids when we have them, regardless of like what you're telling them stories about or whatever, like certain things stay in
Mm,
families. And again, I don't have enough knowledge about generational trauma to like go off on a tangent about that, but I know it exists and I know it's legit.
mm.
It sounds like it wouldn't be legit, like, but it's pretty
Well,
legit.
the same thing is like how we pass down like certain fears, like certain phobias or whatever, that like children are scared of something when they had like just experienced it or run into it the first time sometimes, and we don't have like an explanation of why they would be or something.
Well, and I have dogs. I don't have children yet, but I love my dogs. And I
Oh, you're
have
better anyway.
I have the sweetest, I don't know how I got so lucky, but I have the sweetest dogs that have ever lived. One of my dogs is an Irish setter, and that's a bird dog. They're bred for hunting birds, not other dogs. They're not bred for hunting dogs. But in any case, it's amazing because let me tell you how much my husband and I know about teaching a bird dog how to hunt birds. The answer is nothing. We have no need for him to hunt birds.
Right.
But however, he's 3 now, and it is remarkable the amount of innate knowledge he has for hunting and pausing and stopping and stalking and noticing these birds. I have not done anything to encourage this or train this, or I mean, it's cute. We'll be like, oh, but this, it's a very active breed. He's got a lot of energy. He's always running around darting. He sees a bird and he stops dead because he knows I don't want to scare this bird. I need to be alert. I need to alert the person about this bird. So this is very interesting to me because this is clearly a trait that has been bred for. They were like, oh, this dog was very alert for birds. We're going to breed with another dog that was very alert for birds. And we're going to get this breed of dog,
Mm.
right? So we've done that in human evolution. We just don't know it. It wasn't as intentional, right? But we also don't have the data of like, what did we choose to keep and what did we choose to get rid of? We have all these traits that evolutionarily, the human biology, just humans in general have unconsciously chosen as survival traits that we've passed along, right? We don't
That
know what
we've
they are.
selected
That we've
compared to the rest of like
naturally selected.
yeah, there's
Yes.
there's the natural selection and there's the human selection within it where it's like,
Well, right.
we created like our own kind of artificial ecosystem in that sense. Even if you think of like cities in that way, compare like a city to like an ant colony. Like
Yeah.
it's not the same, of course, because we're different species. Like we don't have one person that like is in control of absolutely everything, but we do have a president. And you know, there are things like that where it's ultimately people basically
Bless
excuse
you.
me. I felt it coming. It's like, God damn it. It comes back to that popular psychology thing that I've talked about before, where it's like people's preconceived notions impact their perception of it. And so like people can't see that like cities are basically just ecosystems that humans are expressing in that sense as much. People don't generally see that we have selected for these things as an expression of natural selection. Well, there's the human selection. So it's like people have like this sort of, it's like their own galaxy in this sense, where it's like they've been imprinted upon by the way that the rest of nature works, that we kind of have our own little sphere within that.
Yes.
And but because we have to be so special, because people are
Yeah, yeah.
incapable of just admitting that we're just an evolution of an old world monkey. No, we're different because we have this, that, and the other things. Okay, but everything has something. And it's interesting to me where it's like those moments when people will talk about their perfect example of their pets, where they're like, you know what? They were just a little bit too smart today. And it's like, evolution, motherfucker.
Yeah.
You're not as special as you think. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Well, here's to your point, we're able to think about, like, there's a meta component of this where we're like able to think about generational differences and innate skills, and the conversation we're having right now, could a dog understand these concepts? I will be very clear in saying my personal belief is, who the fuck knows? I don't know how you would measure that.
that's
They
the thing.
absolutely could.
It's like we
I'm
can't perceive it.
fully convinced that my oldest dog speaks English. She's 17 and way too smart for her own good, just like you just said. And she's around and she's responsive to things that I'm like, this is weird.
Let's
But
see what you're doing here.
oh yeah, she's very, very smart. But the only way we have science is if we can objectively measure things, right? So how the fuck would you measure if a dog is having thoughts about, its existence and how that is in the world without sorry, I'm like having a lot of thoughts at once and having trouble like
No, it's
parsing
okay.
them out. But like I was thinking about Murphy, our bird dog, and like, does he think that he has a problem because he acts this way around birds and other dogs don't? Like, is he like, oh man, I'm fucked up because like I was just like born
And
with this,
and even how people don't see it as a disorder when it's another species. It's
right?
like they're just like, oh well, that's just how it is. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, well, it's like, what happened to like Chrislyn when you were like developing genetically,
yeah,
there was just some part of your DNA that said, what would be good? Have something that stresses about a lot of stuff. That way, like it'll catch stuff. What is the
yeah,
difference between your anxiety socially and so on and your dog's preconceived inclination towards birds? Oh, look, there's a bird. Oh, look, there's
yes,
something stressful.
yes,
But
yes,
because people, again, it's that notion of like people not being able to tell the difference between like what is just this objective notion of no, that's not the case, and what is this reaction against it where it's like, but then I'm not special. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And it's like that's, I guess, maybe less, it's probably more existential, like subconscious existentialism in that sense of that sense of the word, where it's like we're, because there's nothing like biologically that predestines like an organism from uh being able to consider itself outside of it, just its ability to perceive something and be conscious of it. So it's not like people's inherent fear of not being special is biologically necessarily the case, but it's definitely informed by that because people have this sort of almost godlike notion of how special we are compared to all the other species. And then as the other species are slowly catching up, it's like, oh wait, but then like what else do we have going for us?
Well, this has actually ignited a couple of questions that I haven't thought about before. First of all, you've identified the fact that there is a phenomenon where people want to feel special. They want to feel like an individual, that there's something different about me. Why? If we all have that, what is the function of that drive to be different?
I think it's the consequence of the ability to perceive, to be that meta in that sense.
No, I
Just
think you're right.
Where it's like, okay, like people have seen it as a gift all this time, but now it's also kind of it's the other side of that coin where it's like by being able to perceive things, we also can perceive things that run contrary to this worldview that we establish by perceiving. And so that facts don't care about your feelings thing comes back again, where it's like, well, like just because you want to see yourself as special because your brain developed a certain way doesn't mean that other brains cannot develop over time and learn generation to generation as well.
Yeah.
So I think that is a reflection on it where it's like, oh wait, then I'm not special. But if I'm not special, then what meaning do I have? And I don't have any meaning, then why do I exist? And
so here, I'm having a lot of thoughts about this. First of all, we're the first species that we know of to ever have this level of functioning. True? Yeah, we can agree on that. But also, it doesn't mean we're going to be the only ones forever, which I think we can safely assume is also true, which means that we're basically going through, depending on what you believe, I believe in evolution. We're going through thank you, an evolutionary fucking real fun trial and error of like what works, what doesn't. And we might just be in the trial and error, like part of things where like we're so hyper aware that it's causing our brains to explode. I have so much existential dread on a daily basis that I definitely think that like this is, but it may just be a part of it. Like, oh no, we got to dial it back because the people got real upset and weird when we made them too aware of everything. To the point, like, I don't think my dog's having an existential crisis every day of her life. But I do think like us having the ability to look at things from the angles and the perspectives with which we do is incredibly helpful for certain things. This one thing we are touching on is like the downside of that, essentially, right? So a couple things, we might just be prototype A, or like the way that our current functioning is, where we like need to feel special and individual, it might be prototype A. And there's another prototype coming down the line that you and I will never see. It'll be millions and millions of years from now that might look extremely different. The other thing is, I just keep thinking about how this drive to be different and an individual is really not conducive to survival. So we're sort of, I mean, I'm not an anthropologist or an evolutionary psychologist or anything like that, but it's just a thought I'm having. Being different from the group does not ensure your survival. Being a part of the group does. Being able to contribute to the group does. So being fundamentally different and saying like, no, I'm special, I would think wouldn't be a trait that would ensure survival. So but it's very interesting. Yeah.
At the same time, genetic diversity,
that's true,
it's a survival. Otherwise you end up with the Habsburgs and other, the other royal families in quotes, where it's like, well, that is the thing where it's like when you have, and it does kind of bring it home in that sense as well, where it's like, okay, like why do most relatives not mate with each other? Like if you, but like think of it, like take yourself outside of the experience and think, okay, well, like if you took the genetic diversity element out of it, which of course like dogs and such like that don't think about, and yet why do they not generally mate with each other, like in that, like within that family?
Right. Yeah. No,
like
it's a really good point
on it. They can't get disgusted by it or whatever. They're You know what I mean? So there is kind of that genetic predisposition towards seeking other gene pools for genetic diversity in that
Yeah.
sense. So it's like being different socially, yes, can be seen as kind of a um, inconvenience, whatever, disadvantage. But at the same time, when you need that diversity in quotes, I mean, this bullshit 2022 social,
But
political, whatever, like,
I think the audience understands what you mean by
you
diversity
tell
in
me.
this example.
Right.
Yeah, I think actually looking at it from that perspective makes a lot more sense now, because you're right. Being special and being different was something that was sought after, as far as like trying to find the best traits to help our survival. So I guess I take back what I said. It would be advantageous to have like a snowflake. Like, I'm so different. I'm not like the other girls. Like that would be advantageous as far as like from a instinctual primal standpoint of just, you're not here to like live your passion and like write a book and like post on Instagram how great you are. You're literally here to mature, have sex, make a child, and
And
further the
die.
species and die, just like everything else in the world. So like that's obviously like a really crude way of saying that.
But
But
then, yeah,
again, we're picking the lens at which we're looking at something, and that changes things a lot when you change the lens.
right.
One day I had this like, I swear to God, I wasn't high. I can't get high because like I'm just too fucking sensitive. But one day I had this like realization. I was at a horse farm and I was working on the farm, letting the horses out in the morning. And I was like looking at the grass. And I just like, for a second, my brain somehow went to this spot where it's like, holy shit, look at how many individual blades of grass are in this like plot of grass. And like no one gives one shit if they step on like that one, right? So basically I am one of these blades of grass among like fucking billions of blades of grass, and no one gives one shit if they step on me. They weren't like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna step on that blade of grass today to ruin its grassy life. No one cared. They just
Right.
that's just how life works. So in that way, it was like a real eye-opener to like, oh no, like you are born, you have more kids, and you die. That's the lens, right? And then in the other way, it's interesting too, because it's like a lot of people will be like, why me? Why is this thing happening to me? Imagine being the blade of grass and getting stepped on and being like, oh my God, why'd they pick me? So why would they pick me? I didn't do anything. No one picked you. They just had to get from A to B, and they didn't, right? So like there's a lot of different, I don't know. I've gone off topic and I apologize. But
No, it's because it is interesting in that sense where, like, when it is the other, then it's okay. But when it's
right,
me, it's not. So it's the same thing
right.
as like when you have movies where there's the villain that thinks they're so much better than everybody else. Like you look at the trends, like there are certain trending characteristics of villains, which is that they tend to be arrogant, they tend to think that they're more important and so on. But that's exactly what the human species does with everything
Well,
else too.
they also tend to be solo. How many
Hmm.
villains, like they usually have like their mobs because they need to flesh out a way that this one person would be so powerful and able to do all these things. But the villain is usually like a pretty lone wolf type guy,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Which is also interesting because like now we're talking archetypes.
Right, because now you're kind of discriminating against the other by having it like this straw
Yes.
man thing where, yeah, it's a good
Mhm.
point.
Yeah, Carl Jung is a very famous psychologist. He's like long dead and old, but he had this when Freud
He
was
was
coming out.
old first before he was dead.
Yeah.
I
When
don't know why I
Freud was
thought that.
coming out with like his psychosexual stages and theories, and we had like Erik Erikson coming out with developmental theories. Carl Jung came out with these theories on archetypes, and people hated them. They did not get a lot of recognition because people were like, this is too fucking mythical and weird. Like, we don't really know where you're going with this. This is a sidebar, like little fucking asterisks here. Nobody said that about Freud and his obsession with fucking anal shit and like fucking your dad and like all this
Right.
stuff. But they were like, no, Carl Jung, you've gone too far by being too mythical about things. So anyway, I encourage anyone who's like interested in archetypes, to just like go down that rabbit hole a little bit and look at like some of his, theories are theories. They're not proven. They're just ideas. But
Right.
I find his theory of archetypes extremely interesting because it's like, have you ever heard that like there were certain gods, I think it was Norse gods and another type of gods that like they had never met each other as tribes, but like their gods were super similar. Is any of this
Uh,
making
the
sense?
Greeks and the Romans, like
It might,
yeah, like I forget if it was because like the names of the planets and I mean are
right.
very similar. So it's like we do have like there's Zeus and the 4-year-old, the 12-year-olds are going to be laughing. It's like Uranus or whatever,
Oh, yeah.
or Saturn, like whatever. There's like a direct correlation basically between the one and the other in that
Right. But
sense.
we
Even
see
Odin
like,
and Zeus, yeah.
right. We see like these, and it's not, this is just one example, but we see cultures that couldn't have had contact with each other having similar things in them.
Mm.
And so this was sort of Jung's idea of like, there are archetypes. There are things that we keep seeing. There are stories we keep telling with the same themes, with the same stuff coming up. So that has relevance and is important to our psychological like understanding and well-being. And it's really interesting. So if anyone listening to this podcast has any interest in that, I highly recommend going down the Jung rabbit hole. That's Jung. Jung.
Yeah, he may have been old, but he was still young at heart. But,
Oh, I love that we're ending this on a dad joke. This is my favorite one now. Oh, it's awesome.
and it does kind of bring things home too, in that sense of like people, the very reason why people may have rejected it may have been because they didn't like how close to home it might have hit.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
they wouldn't necessarily know because we're so special that we're it's not like that stuff impacts us at all, right?
That makes me less special if everybody has the same archetypes, right? That makes me
Right.
like everyone else, and I don't like that. It doesn't feel good.
Right. Because then I'm not a super special snowflake, which
But
Tyler Durden reminds us that you are not a unique snowflake.
yeah, I will say, I don't think that you and I are friends because of anything other than us enjoying each other as people. And at least that's my assumption.
No,
I enjoy you as a person.
That's how I
Yes.
choose to see it.
Yeah. So if you were wondering, that's our stance.
Is it? Oh, it's me. Sorry. I was like, I heard like a sound that I never hear, and it's like, oh, is that Kristen's alarm? But like I had the headphones on, so I couldn't tell. But yes, I guess that is the sounding bell for it. So yeah, it's just interesting to think about the notion of people's their conscious perception compared to the biological and other like factors kind of informing it when they may not even realize it. And obviously we don't have time to like really go into like the essence of it more in that sense, because we went wide with this, right?
Yeah, I
As
think we
opposed
actually
to,
did
but
stay on topic. I
we
just don't
did.
think we really connected it great. So like, I think we touched on the biological drivers, but we also touched on this idea of like psychological drivers or like perception. Yeah,
Biology informing psychology, as
yes,
it does too. So
it does.
we stayed on topic in the way that you and me are going to stay on topic.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, as always, appreciate having you on here. And
Oh, I love coming on. Come on anytime.
I will continue hassling you to come on again soon. I do want to get like a trio talk set up, or something. You know what I mean? Like just
yeah, it'll happen eventually. One of these days.
Even if we just like what if we like talked with Lauren about like the like old mythology. Like
Ooh, that's cool.
We wouldn't talk about like Judeo-Christian stuff because I want to be respectful of like where he's coming from, but he can look at things like the Egyptian gods and like Zeus, the Greek pantheon and Norse and stuff like that. Like, not that any of us are experts on all that, but like even to like look at it in that sense of like, ooh, like these recurring kinds of things. So yes, I will
down for that.
I will let you get to your day. And
plus, I love Lauren Panillas. Shout out to Lauren Panillas. You're wonderful. We think you're a great human.
Literally, Jared said that like one of the only people that he looks up to is Lauren. When
Oh,
Jared
yes.
Harlan says that he looks up to you, that it's like, or not just physically, but you know.
No, oh
Lauren's
wow! Did you just put a short joke in there? I'm gonna tell him you said that.
It's okay. He will break me. He'll put his Bane mask on and break me. Okay. Same bad time, same bad channel. Catch you
Hey,
next time. Yes.
Don't forget.
Huh?
And don't forget.
I forgot.